welcome everyone. This is our monthly LeanLaw Masterclass. We skipped last month due to sort of general summer vacationing, and just we needed a break, I guess, and you needed a break from us, I think, maybe more importantly. Just to remind everyone, and there's probably some new faces here, the purpose of this monthly session is for you to connect directly with us. Chase Sullivan, head of customer success at LeanLaw, and myself, co-founder and CTO, which means head of product development at LeanLaw. You can connect with us directly this way. We will pick different themes each month. We've done a number of different things that we focused on: invoicing, workflow, payments, trust accounting, reports, etc., etc. We're recording these, so there should be some stuff to get back to. But we're also looking for your help going forward and what's relevant here, and we might go back and revisit some other topics. Anyway, think about as you join us here what's useful, and we would welcome your feedback. So during this session and any other of these sessions, we also welcome questions and comments and interaction. Because of the amount of people joining, we unfortunately cannot make it a fully sort of open meetup where everybody can see each other. But we try to make it as interactive as possible, and so please ask questions, or which you do in the chat box or the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will typically handle those as they come in. Might skip some to the end, or we might in some rare cases just have to get back to you because we overlooked the question or whatever. But trust us that we will try and answer your questions. Did I miss anything, Chase, before we dive in to today's topics?
I just wanted to say, if we end up redoing topics we've already done, it's kind of like rewatching your favorite Saturday morning cartoons getting rerun, except instead of cartoon characters, it's Fred and I.
That might be a little generous.
You're telling me you wouldn't sit down with a bowl of cereal and watch reruns of these webinars?
Let's move on. Let's not answer that. No, we genuinely hope these sessions are helpful. So today the topic is user management, kind of the short version, how to add and remove users in the account, different subtleties when it comes to that, and managing users on matters, and some stuff on rates. We won't get too much into rates because we had a special session on that, but we could if you're interested. But the topic today is user management. I think that will take about half an hour probably, or a little more than half this session. And Chase will run that with your help, hopefully, and my help. And then I will talk about some new features and new updates we've made recently in the product, and also what's next. So we'll spend probably 15 minutes on that, like what other unrelated changes to LeanLaw and what's coming. So that's the plan today. Chase, you want to kick us off and talk about users?
Yeah, let's do that real quick, though. I do want to shout out Doug, a fellow who's joined our team in the last couple of months, who's doing an exceptional job of putting out content for new product updates, like all the cool flashy things, but also the bugs and little bits of feedback we've gotten from our users. So if you hadn't gotten a chance to check out some of his articles or seen any of his messages, I absolutely recommend. That is someone who I get an email from and I will open and read every time, because it is a delight to hear from him. So keep an eye out for those. Like Fred said, we're going to talk about users, and especially, as we work more and more with larger firms with interesting and complex needs, the product changes to accommodate that. So some of the users, some of you joining us today might not actually know about some of these, or might have seen it but not know what it does and don't want to push the button yet. So we'll give you the insight on what you can push and what it does, and then you can figure out if you actually want to push the button or not. All right, let me get a share screen open here real quick and we will jump in. There we go. Fred, how's that look? You're muted.
It looks great.
Awesome. That's what I look for. Feedback from Fred. All right. So users, adding users, removing users, pretty straightforward, right? You've all done it. Added users, invited new users, removed users that are no longer with the firm. But with there's some things, some details you might not be aware of, and I wanted to bring those up. So let's start with adding and removing users. So we are, just for context, we're in the settings section here in LeanLaw, and then down in the users under firm setup. Now, if you don't have access to the firm setup section of settings here, that's because someone at the firm, usually manager and administrator, hasn't allowed it. But I'm going to take a guess and say most of you probably do have this. So we'll go forward with that assumption. So inviting user, nice green button here, invite user, click that. Go ahead and fill this out with our name, our email. Actually, I'm going to do that now as a test, or not as a test rather, but to show something a little bit later. We'll do example. That's a little bit nicer. CO Chase Sullivan, that's me. We'll go ahead and skip initials. The initials here, unless you explicitly select the initials you want, it'll just autofill with your name. The same thing applies for leads, any of you out there using that. Go ahead and skip invoice classing, standard rate, easy peasy. Now, the role is the first part where it gets a little interesting. And I want to talk about that real quick, because LeanLaw roles don't necessarily one-to-one match with someone's title in the firm. So in a firm, you've got a partner, a firm manager, a secretary, a timekeeper, a paralegal, all these different jargon, all these different names or titles, but they might match up to the LeanLaw role differently. So we'll start out here with the most basic, Timekeeper and Timekeeper Plus. Nice description there if you'd like to read that. Basically, a timekeeper is meant to track time in the firm. They're not creating invoices. Maybe they're tracking expenses, but generally their only job in the firm is tracking time. Now, most of you probably will assign this role to paralegals or interns who are just writing down time. If they're writing down time for other users, you'll want the Timekeeper Plus role. So just the intern who goes the extra mile and gets to track time for the partner, that role is for them. And paralegal is very much the same role with a slight difference there.
I would say that this also is a role frequently used for associates. I think you might have sort of missed that.
Yes, I did.
But only in some firms, and it sounds odd that they would just be considered a timekeeper. But again, think about what they're doing in the product, not what their job title is.
Right.
So if all they do in LeanLaw is to enter their time and expenses, and somebody handles the billing, invoicing, and they shouldn't really or don't need to see any of that information, the timekeeper role is the right one to pick.
Right. And that's a good point. So sometimes you'll have someone with the title of attorney, someone who went to school to be an attorney. They do attorney things on the day-to-day in the firm. However, they don't need to be involved with the billing at all. You would give them a role like timekeeper or paralegal because those roles don't necessarily have full access to create bills or create clients and matters, depending on how the firm is structured. Operator, well, actually, we'll go to attorney. That's the next logical one. Attorney is a timekeeper, but they now also have the ability to look at billing information, to create bills, and to create clients and matters. So sometimes your attorney might not actually need the attorney role, depending on if you don't want them to create bills. I know there's some firms where giving the attorneys the ability to create invoices causes a lot of pain and suffering, and it might be beneficial to switch them from attorney to timekeeper. Operator, I bet that's probably what most of you here today are set as. Operator can be anything. It's someone who's involved with generally the billing within the firm, sometimes the accounting within the firm, tracking time, creating new clients and matters. That's a big one. Generally a secretary or bookkeeper position within the firm who's involved with everything, but not necessarily who's creating and tracking all of the items. And then principal Now you might think in general firm terms, principal is a partner in the firm or someone who's their name is on the wall, so to speak, and they have full access to everything, almost like an administrator. However, sometimes partners don't need access to everything, and it might be more appropriate for them to have, say, the attorney role. I've actually seen situations where partners get the timekeeper or timekeeper plus role, just like all of the other timekeepers in the firm. Generally, principal in LeanLaw lingo is used for someone who wants billing and reporting access firm-wide. So maybe not necessarily someone who's billing, but someone who needs to keep track of how the firm is doing. What's the revenue look like? Are we collecting on invoices? Sometimes someone who is a secretary or bookkeeper has that principal, that highest level of role, just because they need access to do and see and be hands-on with everything. So important takeaway here, sometimes the title, a job title someone has is not necessarily the title or role they need in LeanLaw. Okay, no questions, great, we'll keep going. So we filled all of our information out, we've picked the role. Now there's a couple of checkboxes here that might seem a little bit scary, and I want to talk about those. The big one here is include on all matters. Some firms, everything here has that caveat. What this does is it gives the user access to every matter within the firm. So let's say I'm the secretary of a firm and I need access to run bills and reports on everything. Makes sense for me to have this. Sometimes you have a timekeeper or an associate who doesn't need access to everything, just their 5 or 6 cases. That's when you would not have this turned on. Access to firm setup, kind of touched on this a little bit before. That gives us access to the firm setup over there on the left-hand side. I hope that's pointing the right direction. And then CC on responsible invoices. This is an interesting one. If this is enabled, whenever the user is set as the responsible on a matter and it's invoiced, they're automatically CC'd on that invoice going out. So we had a request come in for that. Fred?
I have a little extra on the, so on the include on all matters that you went over here.
Yep.
So I think you want to, if you're in a large firm, you probably don't want to check this, even if you want an attorney or a principal in the firm to have access to everything from the point of view of reporting or from the point of view of seeing what's going on in the firm. You would check this if typically if that person needs all the matters in drop downs when you pick things, or if they are really actually working on all the matters. We will see later where this is where this matters when you start a new time entry and you pick matters from a drop down. It's constrained by whether you include it in the matter or not. But you might have access to the data for that matter in reports anyway, even if this is not checked. So yeah, it sounds a little complicated. Let us know if you need help here to decide what to do.
Thank you, Fred. I'm going to go ahead and add this user and send the invite. Now, when you click this button, LeanLaw is going to send an email to the email we entered here with an invitation to join the firm. So if you have someone new join the firm, you can let them know that they should expect to receive an email from us. Now, sometimes that gets lost in spam. Sometimes it's the wrong email address. Sometimes we need to go in and resend that invite. The way that we do that is by setting myself with that name was a poor idea because I'm already in here. So every time I look at it, I look at the actual account. Go ahead and click on this. This is the new user we just invited. If we need to send them that email, we can click on their name like I just did, and then click resend invite down here at the bottom. And that gives us 2 cool options. One, we can click the green button to say, okay, or we can copy this link here, and that's the same link they would be emailed to sign up. So if it's still getting sent to spam, if they're not seeing it, you're able to pop in here, grab that link and send them that message, how the firm does, and say, here you go, easy, that's the link. So talking about adding users, and we'll talk about removing in just a moment. sometimes the firm will have someone come in and someone leave around the same time. Fred's leaving my firm, but Jonathan is joining shortly thereafter. And I want to know, how's that going to work with my subscription? Do I get credited for the difference? Do I need to notify LeanLaw anytime I change? What's the deal? So the good news there is it's actually relatively simple. You got to remember, first we remove the user, because then that puts the credit toward the unused time on the account, and then you add the new user. So remove first, then add. If you do it the opposite direction, you'll get charged for that extra seat, but the unused credit will be used on the next invoice. So you will still get the credits back. It's just a matter of, do you want it right away, or are you going to see it the next time you're invoiced? Fred, did I say that right?
I don't actually think that was correct, strictly speaking. Sorry. If you add a user, you will be charged for that billing period. So let's say you're paying monthly and we're adding a user right now, which is with a week left until we get billed again. You will be charged immediately for a week for that user. Now, if you then later remove a user or remove that user, the next billing will be adjusted down. You're not going to be repaid for what you paid for inviting that user right in this moment. So this is why you want to first remove the user. You still have a paid seat for the remainder of the billing period, because you paid for that billing period. And when the new billing period resumes, you will be paying for one less seat. But if you add another user and before that happens, you would be credited for that.
Okay. Good to know. So remove the user first, add the new one. You don't have to let us know to get that removed. The system will take care of it.
So there's a question about what happens to when you remove a user and if they have unbilled time. And I think we're probably going to cover that next, right, Chase?
I was actually just going to do that. Yeah, Karen asked that question at the perfect time. So first, I'm going to explain removing versus disabled, because that might be a little confusing at first. If you click on just any random user in here, there's not, I can't remove myself, unfortunate. You don't have the option to remove any user. It just says disable. What does that mean? Well, this user, Sarah, part of our team, has actually tracked time, expenses, billed things. We don't want to remove her and remove all of that, information that was associated with her account. So instead, LeanLaw shows us the disable option. So to answer Karen's question, when you remove a user, more properly, when you disable a user, all of their billed and unbilled time is still accessible. You can still create new invoices with their time entries. You're still able to see that information on reports. They're just not able to create new time and expenses and fees. I got the nod of approval from Fred. We're good to go.
Yeah, no, that covers it.
Good. So to more properly answer the remove part, the only time you can fully remove or delete a user is when they haven't tracked any time, expenses, invoices. So this user we just created here with my name, Chase Sullivan, if we click on that, you see it says remove instead of disable. That's because nothing's been tracked here. We can remove the user just like that. So because the user had no activity, gives us the option to remove it.
When you disable a user, by the way, maybe you can do that real quick here.
Yeah.
Chase, so we can see how it looks. We no longer charge for that user in your subscription. Just click OK here. But they can be used for reporting. They'll appear under the exempt category and grayed out, which means that they're no longer able to log in. That's one thing. So you do not have to worry about this user being able to see anything in the account and log into it. So that's disabled, but you can still, as Chase said, bill and so on. So that's the mechanism. And then there's a good question here, if you can disable a user and create a new one with the same email. The answer, unfortunately, is no. we use the email is used as a way of identifying users that actually prevents that from happening. So if you are in a situation where that needs to happen, and new user is added that happens to have the same email as one you've disabled, we're going to have to help out behind the scenes to make that happen. So that particular scenario, call support basically, or click the green button, and we can absolutely help with it, but it won't actually work if you try that on your own.
On a similar note, sometimes we get questions about how do I update an email. Let's say I wanted to update Sarah's email here. Say we changed her email, or we forgot there should be an S after Sarah. That is something you would need to contact support about as well. Just let us know, hey, this is the individual's or user's current email, and this is what we'd like to update it to. And our team can relatively quickly get that updated for you.
Sounds good.
I think we're good on questions there. Let me know if you guys have any questions on the users page here. I'm going to flip next to the user permissions page, which I believe we've actually talked about briefly before, but I wanted to cover real quick in the context of inviting new users and user management. So we talked about earlier the difference between a job title and the role in LeanLaw, how they're not the same. And that's important to keep in mind here. You'll see up top, we've got the columns, timekeeper, the same roles, timekeeper, paralegal, attorney, principal, operator, and accountant. My goodness. And this is where we can control the level of access or permissions, see, that each of those user roles has. Now, we get asked frequently, hey, this user, Jimmy, we don't want to have access to this. Well, unfortunately for you and Jimmy, that permission is based on the role that Jimmy has. So we can't, there's not a column here for Jimmy specifically. We would need to figure out what his role is. And then everyone with that role would have those same level of permissions. So important to keep that in mind. Sometimes we get asked, hey, we don't want any of our attorneys to track time for others. There's a setting here. You would go in, you would find that specific option and uncheck that.
I want to add one thing here, Chase, which is that updating these permissions is only available for our pro subscribers. So if you look at this page and see all these checkboxes sort of frozen, that's because you're on our core product and we need to upgrade to pro to be able to control that in more detail. So
that's correct. Yep. And actually, I completely missed out accountants. So accountants, we didn't see in that list of roles earlier. How the heck do we add accountants? I'm going to pause user permissions, jump back to users real quick. Down at the bottom, there's that green invite user button. Right next to it is the add accounting partner. So we'll click that. Same type of information. However, there's this little checkbox up here, this agreement. I confirm this user is not part of our firm, because with LeanLaw, outside accountants are free. They're given free access to LeanLaw because they're not actively, tracking billable time or the things that someone normally part of the firm would do. The invite process is the same. They still receive an email just like everyone else, and their permissions are controlled separately. You'll notice that down at the bottom here in that exempt users section where we saw Sarah earlier, we've got accountant role users because they aren't being charged as part of your subscription. Lee's got a question. Why isn't there a listing for the Timekeeper Plus role? Fred, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, so it's a great question, and I understand why it doesn't seem to make sense in a way. But the reason is, so timekeepers by default have the roles that we see here. So if you open time entry, Chase, you can by default say, I mean, normally you'd have that checked up there, Chase, and you might have those unchecked. So you can then, the Timekeeper Plus role is really just a way to override for an individual user that one permission that's called time for others. So you can have a bunch of timekeepers and not give them all access to time for others, but the timekeeper give individual ones access to that role. Now, obviously, it would be nice if you could do this for all permissions, and like Chase mentioned earlier, you should be able to override roles permissions for individuals. And yes, we want to support that at some point. So it's a little bit of a hack, if you will, to provide that one override for timekeepers.
Interestingly,
hopefully that answers the question.
Interestingly, Timekeeper Plus actually existed before we had user permissions. We had a firm that came and said, hey, we want to allow Jimmy, again, the ability to track time for the users, but not everyone else. Hence the inception of the Timekeeper Plus role. So what I want to do now is actually go through a couple of these user permissions that are a little tricky or might not seem to do what they exactly state they do, because there's quite a bit going on here. And the first of which actually is the view and adjust rates option here. Fred, in one sentence, can you describe what the view and adjust rates permission does?
Well, it determines whether that timekeeper can see their rates, and specifically it's their own rates, right? So
yep.
If you go to the time entries tab, this is typically where the action is at. You create a time entry. Now that little toggle up there will allow you to see and adjust the rate. Down below, it would prevent them from doing that. But it also prevents them from seeing in the table over on the right. You can see here that we have a list of Chase's time entries, the number of hours, and then the amount. So that permission, if it's switched off, would basically hide all that, all those numbers for the timekeeper. If you don't want timekeepers to see dollar amounts for things, then that's the option for you, I guess.
Great. A little bit more than a sentence, but we'll take it. There was extra description there. We've got a question. Does the outside accountant can create invoice reporting and other features? The answer to that is yes, they can.
Yeah, by default, an accountant and operators are kind of the same thing, in the sense that by default, they're meant to basically have access to everything. They're sort of operating in the firm with full access. They can create invoices and they can send them to QuickBooks. They can see reports, etc. And that's kind of the default permission level for those roles. You can adjust that then on this page if you want accountants to not have access to certain things. It's very unusual if your accountant doesn't have access to pretty much everything, but you might maybe prevent them from certain workflow functions. So if you open the billing tab here, Chase,
down there,
maybe you don't want them to be able to edit draft invoices or approve them. That might not make sense, and you don't only want attorneys to do that. By all means, uncheck those boxes. But that's how it works by default.
Great, excellent question there. So next up is the expenses section. There's two here that do trip me up on occasion as well. They are assigned QuickBooks expenses and can be assigned to expense. We'll start with the one on the bottom. When we create an expense, jump over here to expenses, you've got the option to add a user. Now, sometimes you've got users who don't necessarily need to be added as a user. Say it's an associate or an intern. They might be the one who spent the $5 to send something with FedEx, but it's not actually, it doesn't need to be associated with them. So you're able to turn that off for individual users. But not to be confused with the other option, assign QuickBooks Expenses, which, if you're familiar with the LeanLaw and QuickBooks Expense Sync, you might already know what this is. Basically, it gives users the ability to pick unassigned expenses from QuickBooks and say, hey, this is the client and matter specifically that we want to match this with. So usually this is only enabled for, say, your operators or specific attorneys who track expenses, or when the firm allows their attorney role to track those expenses. no questions there. So we'll jump to the next one, probably my favorite on the list, trust, the trust deposits and payments option. Now, if you're familiar with trust already, it probably makes sense. This allows users to make deposits or make payments. It gives those little buttons in the trust accounting section to do both of those. However, I asked Fred, hey, Fred, we use Gravity Legal for trust requests. Does this give me the option to send requests through them if I have this enabled? And the answer was?
Yes.
Correct. So having this enabled gives your users the full ability to deposit, request, and make trust payments. Can you explain why or why not to list a user in the expense area? Alicia, always with those excellent questions. Well, that depends on whether or not you want them to have the ability to view expenses, create expenses, assign them. If you're asking specifically about the option here, can be assigned to expense.
Yeah, I don't think that the question is totally clear. Like, why would you not have users able to see expenses at all? I don't know, is that the question, or is the question whether, and a further explanation of that last permission? Not really. Maybe you can follow up and we can move on and then answer that question.
Yeah, just give us some more detail, Alicia, and I will do my best to answer that. We've got a question from Mercy in regards to the trust. Do you have a trust account ledger sheet report? The answer to that is yes. I'm going to shelve that though, because that's a bit of a tangent. If you pop into support and ask that question though, they'll be able to answer you at the same time. And if not, you can personally write me an email with that question and I will get back to you as soon as I can. All right, we are at expenses. We did trust. That's fantastic. Let's take a look at reports. I know Fred and his team have been very busy working on reports right now. Let's see. Ooh, the My Revenue report. So some firms don't want all of their users to have access to all of the revenue reporting, but sometimes you want to give them access to just their revenue, just the things they worked on, they were assigned to. This does that. Oftentimes, especially in larger firms, users don't have the ability, or the firm doesn't want users to have the ability to run these. But you might say, hey, for all of our users who are attorneys, they bill, and we want to give them the ability to check out their personal revenue. So this excludes everything else the firm is doing and only shows their information. Got some clarification from Alicia here. The benefit of assigning a user to an expense. Ooh, when we track, we associate all expenses with the originator/user. So that's the perspective I'm thinking from. Well, I think that largely comes into play for revenue allocation, correct, Fred? And origination?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your firm. You always want to look at things going on. Or you most of the times you look at LeanLaw in terms of what needs to happen with the billing. So do you want the expenses when they go on the bill to reflect the user that tracked that expense? Some firms do want to do that. Other firms don't. Other firms want that to be more of an anonymous thing where the expense is just an expense and it was incurred and the client needs to pay it. And from the point of view of reporting, it just needs to be associated with the attorney responsible for that matter. So it really just depends on how you need your invoicing to reflect which user is involved with an expense and how you want the reporting to reflect that. Mm-hmm. And we have both types of firms in our client base here, and so you kind of have to make up your own approach. But hopefully we're here to help in terms of explaining how those options can help you. In some cases, maybe you don't quite have the flexibility you need. And so let us know if you're struggling and we can help.
Great. And last one here is the billable reports. What the heck does enabling or disabling the billable reports actually do? We'll go take a look real quick, because I can tell you, but I also want to show you having that enabled gives access to the billable, the productivity, and work in progress reports. So you've got billable, productivity, and your WIP build collected. And Fred, I also believe it covers the WIP detail report.
Yes.
Okay. So you're looking for the any reports that have the word WIP, productivity, or billable included. That is what those permissions do. Yeah.
And I think I want to add here before we move on, probably to the next section here, Chase, that is if you need more flexibility here, we're quite open to adding other permissions here. Like we covered before, that there's some flexibility that's missing here. So by all means, reach out if you feel like you're not getting, you don't have the control knobs you need on the permissions front. So.
All right, that's it for user permissions. Now I want to take a look at access to matters. That's a pretty big part of running a firm. Who has access to what? And if you, I mean, you absolutely would have seen it, but the new client matter UI here, always a treat to go look at that. So I'm going to open up one of the matters here. So the question is, we've got someone who's just joined the firm. What's the best practice as far as giving them access to specific matters? We could include them on all matters, but they don't bill on all matters. Or we could go through and add them to each. And like Fred said, most of the time we generally suggest a mix of both depending on the role. A topic we get asked about a lot is the billing and rates. Who has access to it? Who's able to change it? In general, we suggest if the user needs access to update rates, then you set them as an attorney. I believe that's correct, Fred, right?
Well, it's not quite as simple, I think. The permissions page we just looked at, we skipped over the client matter section, but you can also adjust whether a user can create clients or matters, can view rates, or can edit rates. So, it's that third one that you're kind of getting at here.
Right.
The default, I think, is enabled for attorneys. Your account here that we're looking at does not reflect the default settings, so it looks a little confusing. But that's the setting that controls that.
Okay. So there was a question about a week ago that I got while we were building the agenda for this that I thought was kind of interesting on whether to add someone to a matter or not. And in general, being a part of a matter should be determined by whether that person is working on it, not necessarily not being part of it can still give you access to the reports. So let's say, for example, we've got a partner in the firm or like a bookkeeper who needs to run reports on matters. Just because they aren't listed as a user here does not mean they can't still run reports on it. So if you've got everyone set to include in all matters, everyone's going to be here. But that, not everyone necessarily is contributing and doesn't necessarily need access, but the users that are able to run reports are still going to have access to it. It just won't appear in their list of dropdowns for clients and matters. And Fred, I believe you'd mentioned this earlier. Why is it that we do that?
Well, let's clarify. So let's stay on go to a reports page or
pick your favorite.
Billable by client.
Great.
So in here we see show matters for user. This filter here appears very consistently throughout the product, and there's different options here to either show the report or whatever you happen to be looking at. It could be expenses or it could be invoicing or whatever. And here, if you have a name set here and we're saying show matters for users, we're filtering the report or whatever you're looking at down to all the clients and matters that this user is part of, in the sense of being on that list that Chase was just showing. Now, I can X out this selection here and then see the report for across the whole firm. So when I do that, now I'm looking at everything, even if I'm not assigned to those matters. This particular option is only available to principals, operators, and accountants. So it's not like your attorneys and others can just do this and see everything across the firm. Just the principals and operators and accountants can do this. But it does mean that if you are one of those, and you're sort of interested in seeing a list of just what you're involved with, but only sometimes see the report for the whole firm, you want to kind of limit what you're assigned to in terms of matters, because it gives you that flexibility here. Now, if you pick a user in this dropdown, there's additional options to just limit the clients and matters to whether Chase is responsible. So he's apparently responsible for something. He's responsible for these 3 clients, or he might be originating some clients or matters, apparently not. But that gives you the additional control. So I think what you were trying to say, Chase, is that whether you're assigned to a matter or not depends on how you want flexibility in the rest of the product in terms of filtering down clients and matters. When you look at report, when you add a time entry, when you look at a list of expenses and so on.
Yes, that is a much more eloquent way of describing what I was trying to get at. Come back here. We've got a question here on, let's see, since the rates for the client are different, even the same attorney is working on the case, can we set up the rate for each client instead of by attorney?
So this is an excellent question. And the unfortunate answer is no at the moment, but we actually announced this last time we spoke, that we're working on a better mechanism for controlling rates across all the users for a given role or for a given matter. So but currently it's not possible, and you do have to manage the types of rates for each individual. I don't totally know if I understood the question, but if hopefully that helps. Otherwise, I'd love to talk to you more about what the gap is.
Great. So we've been talking about adding people to a matter. Let's take a quick look at how that's done. Down at the bottom of this list, we'll scroll down because we've got a lot of users. There's an add user dropdown. So anyone who's not currently on this list, we can add. We'll go ahead and add Katie and save changes. Now, if we need to remove a user, we can click the triple dots here next to their name and click remove user, or remove from matter rather. So they no longer have access to that matter, just like Fred was showing. Down here at the bottom, you might have noticed the restrict access to these users. That means anyone not included on this list will not have access to it, whether reporting or adding themselves to the matter. Like Fred was saying, some roles have access above. Let's see. Quickly, I want to describe the difference between responsible and originating. Responsible is the user that's leading the case. So the person who's in charge and ultimately responsible, usually the one communicating with the client, and originating is the person who brought it to the firm. Now, oftentimes there's overlap there, but sometimes I might bring a case to our firm and say, hey, Fred, I know you're responsible. I still want an origination cut on this or binder's fee, because this person's my friend and I brought them here, something like that.
Yeah, and so the kind of technically, there's an important difference between the responsible and the originating. There's always exactly one person responsible for a matter. So you will always you're required to assign a responsible attorney, is what we call it. It doesn't have to be an attorney, but an individual in the firm that's responsible for that matter. You can have none or one or more originators. And it affects, again, the filtering that you can do, as Chase was just showing. But for the origination especially, it affects the compensation reports we have. So just to kind of tie to kind of cover that briefly at a very high level. Under settings and reports, if you want to go there.
For settings.
Yeah, and reports.
Down there.
You have, if you're not using, you might or might not be using the revenue allocation and compensation reports here, but the origination setting is typically used to allocate percentages to attorneys, and there's a bunch of options in here to do that. Totally beyond the scope of this conversation, but that's that's why the originator is important, because it affects these reports.
Mm-hmm. I do know we talked about this quite extensively when we had the masterclass a few months ago on revenue reporting or revenue origination. Actually, that was last month.
Quick question on the rates. There's a question if you can update the rates on the draft invoices, and the answer is yes. If you set a rate in here, there's sort of a cascading mechanism for rates. There's a standard rate for the user, and then there's different rate types. You can override them on the matter, you can override them on a time entry, and you can override them once you get to the draft invoice and set update the rates in there. So there's lots of options to update the rates as you at different points of the billing process.
Great. Okay, so keep those questions coming. If you have them, we'll work to get those answered. But I do want to flip it back to Fred, because we have new things to show off.
Yeah, so we are at maybe a little over even the kind of user management conversation that we wanted to have today. I wanted to spend some time, if you can stop sharing, Chase. Wanted to spend some time on what's happening in other areas of the product and what's coming. Here's another test account we're looking at. I will apologize in advance that there will be some strange client and matter names and so on in here, but hopefully we can see beyond that. First of all, I want to echo what Chase said in terms of our colleague Doug and his work on helping us communicate and document and write documentation for the features we are providing for you. And so when you're wondering what's new in LeanLaw, the way to do that is to go to the little help button up here. Go to documentation. It'll open up our support site. Here you can search for things, but if you and it's categorized in various ways here. If you go down to product announcements, and this should also pop up on your, you'll get a little chat icon here that'll pop up with a link to this every month. And there's a summary here of what's new and some link to additional documentation if you need it. So I'm going to basically just talk about a couple of these things that were announced last time since we spoke. First one is duplicating a time entry. So this is a feature that's enabled on the time entry pages, which is the time entries tab, but also the calendar tab. And what we've added is if you go pick a time entry, any time entry, and then there's now a menu over here, the sort of familiar triple dot menu. You click duplicate time entry, and it takes the information for that time entry and tees it up so that you can create a duplicate of it. The only thing that's different from the time entry that you duplicated and and the one coming up here is that we set today's date. So we change the date to today's date. And so, so if I want to, where this comes in handy is, I might be working on the same thing every day. I clock in, clock out, I guess, at the end of the day, track my time for that client. I come in the next day and I want to do, basically I'm doing the same thing. So I pick the time entry from yesterday, duplicate it. It's now got the today's date. I might adjust the number of hours, but my very informative description is still there for the client. So this is handy. You can also do this from the calendar page. We've had some issues with this button that currently does this, where you click on it and you create a duplicate. And if you click some other place here, you will just edit the time entry. We're going to tweak this UI a little bit. It's causing some problems, especially on these really small time entries. But the copy time entry function is available on this little duplication icon up here. So that's one thing that's new. Looking at the time, we've done several things on revenue allocation reports. One of the more visible things is this additional option right here, basically another option to add a percentage for revenue allocation. Most firms will allocate an origination percentage to the originators. This allows you to also allocate something to the responsible attorney, along with all these other options we have. Now, this affects the revenue allocation report, revenue by attorney report, which we have are in the process of renaming. We are going to start calling that the compensation report, and we're putting in parentheses here revenue by attorney, which is what it used to be called. It's called compensation because it's really focused on, taking collections in the firm and splitting it up. It looks a little boring on this one. We're not doing good work in this firm, it looks like. Splitting up the collections for individuals, and then taking into account origination percentages, et cetera, et cetera. If your firm is not using this and it sounds interesting, I'd strongly recommend looking at this. It's a really powerful report. So so that's sort of high level, just a few changes. There were some other changes made there, but the name and then this option. We added, Chase pointed to this briefly in his section, the WIP detail report. You can find that under report by user. Click WIP detail. This is basically all the open work in progress, time entries and expenses and so on for a given time period that you can filter down. And you can include different things here. By default, it shows all the WIP. You might not care about expenses. You can leave that out by clicking this button, et cetera, et cetera. I guess that's broken. But it's grouped by user here. So CR, XX, PP, et cetera, group by user. You can export it. This is handy for some firms to do the review every month for their matters and get a nice overview before the invoicing is done. So it might come in handy for you. I'm running a little low on time, so I'm gonna kind of focus in on a couple of other things. I mentioned this last time. I want to just flag it again in case we have any new listeners. We've launched a public API. This is probably not relevant for most of you, but for the ones I just want to flag it that we now have an option that allows third-party developers to create integrations with LeanLaw, so that you can create better workflows with other tools that you have. I say it's not relevant for most of you because it does require another developer to get involved, but I'm just flagging it as something we've worked on and released, and that provides options for especially our larger clients. With just a few minutes left here, I want to also just cover what's next briefly. One thing I want to highlight there is we're adding a mechanism that we're calling short codes. I actually am unfortunately not able to show it. I'll show where it will appear.
What does it do?
Yeah, what does it do? It's easy to explain. We have the notion of a text snippet that many of you use, this is not a very realistic example. You might have very long text snippets that you will use when you create time entries to put on to put in your time entry descriptions. Now we're going to be adding short codes to these, so little short text strings, like for example, phone call could be PC, or legal filing, LF. When you then go to a time entry and type LF space, it will expand out to that full snippet string. So you can pick the snippets up here, but you can also just type the short codes. I think a lot of you essentially expect this because a lot of other tools have this feature and we don't. So I'm excited to say that on this front, we've finally caught up with the rest of your tool set. So it's been a long time coming, but if you're used to using this and other tools, I'm expecting this to be released this week, basically. So it is pretty much ready to go.
I'm excited for that one.
Oh, you are? Good.
Yes, very excited.
Yeah, we're pretty much out of time, but another one I wanted to mention is on the receivable reports. When you drill in, it goes to a fairly odd place here. And what we're going to do is that when you're looking at the receivable reports, when you click in, you'll be able to actually see the open invoices that comprise the account balance, and you'll be able to email the open invoices to the client as reminders. So a beefing up of the receivable reports. And this is important because it allows now attorneys to do those things that don't have access to QuickBooks. All of these things are available in QuickBooks. If you have access to that, you can see open invoices and various AR reports over here. But we're adding more of that capability in LeanLaw now, so that you can chase down AR and get rid of that bad debt. Sorry, a little rushed here at the end. There's a lot of other exciting things we're doing kind of down the road, and let's put a rain check on that and talk about that next time. Chase, do you wanna wrap us up here? And
yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anytime. I'll be here all week. So we're just about at the end here. I did want to quickly leave a note that, as many of you are joining or haven't necessarily been here since we started these, we're always looking for feedback, not just on the product, but also on these webinars. If there's topics or workflows or areas of focus that you want to see Fred and I talk about, the product is always expanding and growing. And there's a lot of things in here that you might not be familiar with, and even veterans of the software might not know about. So if you are looking back through our YouTube playlist of these and you go, hey, they haven't talked about this topic, or I really want to learn more about this process, absolutely send us a message and let us know, hey, love the masterclass or not, and let us know, hey, I want to see some time spent looking at this. It really helps us figure out and get a pulse check on where you guys are curious about the software and what we can do to help explain that. So always looking for that kind of feedback.
Awesome, Chase. So we'll see you next month. We'll do this in September, and we'll announce a topic here pretty soon. And thanks, Chase, and thanks everyone. Especially, we really appreciate your engagement and your questions. We think that certainly makes it more fun for us, hopefully more engaging for you as well. So thank you.
We'll catch you next month.